The belly, the beast, they try to see us in the coffin. Doja ain't cheap, but I need that shit often. In the 50, doing 98, lane to lane cross. And stay flossing like a toothbrush to suit Ralph. My kick's too tough, she twist Dutch, I watch Snow in the Bluff. Had 99 kicks, the shoe rack, half Nike. You can search and you'll never find a nigga quite like me. Police wanna strike any nigga with some melanin. I pray for the day we see retaliatory medicine. I'm training too, hopping over fences, crash bandicoot. Tread water, Afro Jesus, they can't handle truth. Lock myself inside the booth.
All right, so welcome to the new Frankfort School. This is your show with Browning, Slank, and I.
What up? What up?
How's everybody doing tonight?
Pretty good. Doing all right.
So, Slank, you were talking about that you just got a copy of Grundrisa.
Yes, I've not got a chance to read it yet, obviously. But plan on reading it soon, though, yeah. Said it was his most important work.
I would say that Grundrisa, it is maybe not his most important, but certainly definitely a piece that is worth reading, because at the very least it teaches you A, how to understand the rest of Marx's thought, and B, to see how Marx develops the kind of dialectical thinking that becomes very significant later, like in the development of his work on Capital.
Was it written before Capital then?
Yes. So Grundrisa is actually the notes for Capital.
I read the first volume of Capital.
Yeah, and like obviously Capital is like kind of a monolithic work, right? It's at times overwhelming. It's always very in-depth and very much focused on Marx's ability to communicate ideas to an audience that by and large had never seen something like this before, right? So I had a friend one time tell me that the reason that Marx repeats himself so much in Capital is because he is forming a new science, right? So we're going to see it a little bit in the piece that we're going to be discussing today, which, depending on the translation that you're running from, is either called The Meaning of Human Requirements, where there is private property and under socialism, the difference between extravagant wealth and industrial wealth, division of labor in bourgeois society, or the other title, which is the one that Marxist Internet Archives use, which is, Human Requirements. And the difference between the two is that, so I'm going to argue that there's less of a difference between these that you will see than you would see with Capital, right? They are both slightly more clear-headed. Grundrisa is also the only place we can find one of Marx's like missing works now, which is his work on technology. So they're usually called the fragment on technology. We know that Marx has more developed writings on technology because we have seen them through both through Luxemburg, through Lukács, and through Lenin, who all had access to them. But at some time in the early 1900s, the pieces go missing. We suspect they were in Germany last, which is a bad sign for the pieces still existing. So the Grundrisse is kind of the closest we can get. But the piece we're discussing today is going to be much more heavily focused on alienation and relations of capital. And at times, in a way that cuts through some of the issues that people have with reading Capital, right? So, like when Marx talks about things in Capital, he tends, again, to get repetitive. He's writing it serialized. So it was a fun story. It's published side by side with like a serialized vampire story. Which is why Marx is referencing vampires so much in Capital, because he's kind of trying to get some of that audience to read him, and also because he is reading that while he is reading his own work to make sure that everything is printed accurately. So as we go through this piece, alienation becomes a super prominent idea right from the beginning, pretty much, right? So when we talk about alienation, obviously it begins as a legal term, which is the 3 qualifications for property under Roman law, which is the right to destroy something, the right to change something, and that you have had exclusive possession of it without coercion, which kind of becomes the basis for all other law, ironically. We all know like how well historically the West has followed the law that like if someone else owns something, you're not allowed to just take it. But what we're going to see is a like kind of mirror of this throughout this piece, where there is something that is stolen from people when they are converted from being people into being laborers, right? How's it going, Hayes?
2 hours with extreme battery saver.
Yeah, your soul is stolen from you.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the implication that part of what is taken from you is your soul, or at least your human essence, right?
Good evening.
How's it going, Alex? In the very beginning, we see a new manifestation of the forces of human nature and a new enrichment of human nature. Under private property, their significance is reversed. Every person speculates on creating a new need in another so as to drive him to a fresh sacrifice, a new mode of gratification, and therefore economic ruin. Each tries to establish over the other an alien power so as to thereby find satisfaction of his own selfish need. Which is a very bleak way to look at what capital is doing to people, but is also Marx kind of addressing like the is human nature always natural argument, right? Like Marx is very clear here that human nature is going to fundamentally change once capital is abolished.
Yeah. Like it depends on more like the mode of production that you're in.
Yeah. So like under feudalism, the nature of humanity was to be a peasant for most of humanity. Stephen Jay Gould, in his book, The Mismeasure of Man, I don't know if you've had I've ever read it.
No, I haven't read it.
It's his dispute of race science, where he goes through an history of race science, but also, like, as a scientist, he attacks the actual scientific underpinnings behind these things, right? So he says that the first time that race science really is developed is during the dialogues. The question is asked, well, how could we convince the people that some are more deserving to lead than others? And Plato responds by saying that, well, we could tell a story, but we would shame ourselves and make ourselves liars. He says, well, what do you mean? He says, well, so what we tell them is that there are people made of 3 different materials. The first is bronze. This is what most men are made of, and they are fit to be, foot soldiers, laborers, now it would be factory workers, and all that. And then there are people made of silver, and they're fit to be officers. They're fit to lead companies. And then there are people made of gold who are fit to rule the country. And the man asks him, he says specifically, well, why would we do this to people? Why would we tell them that? That would be a shameful thing to do. And he says, well, I'm not saying that we should. I'm just saying that it would work. Maybe not for this generation or the next, but give it 3 generations. And this generation that is currently growing's children, they'll believe us for sure. And like the reality is that race science never advances past that point, right? You like build a narrative and stick to it hard enough and keep repeating it, and eventually people will believe it. But also, this is the argument that is the basis for human nature as well, right? It is natural for some people to rule, and it is natural for some people to be subservient. It is natural for some people to excel, right? The big mythology that is pushed around capital and that relies on this very alienated, very disrupted populace that sees itself as being subservient to other people. So how did you get to read the full piece, Slank?
Yeah,
sure. I know you're in law school, so
no, I read it. Yeah, no, I mean, just the whole thing about like Browning was saying, how it just, even like the living standards, you're supposed to like capitalism teaches you to accept like less as like the norm, so that you're like okay with you know what I'm saying, just not having things, I guess.
Yeah, the example he gives is, I think, so first he gives the Irish, and he's like, yeah, their food taste has been reduced to just potatoes, and even then it's moldy potatoes, right?
And then he said like every country has like the Ireland.
Is there a charger?
That like France has an Ireland. Speaking about how like the conditions were like approaching that for like every country type shit.
Right, and this is the core of the argument that he is making for political economy being a moral science rather than a physical one, right? Mm-hmm. He's arguing that these, like whether it's Malthus or Ricardo, they are both equally ascetic. Like both of them are advocating for reductions for someone.
Yeah.
We all suffer reductions. In Malthus, it's so that some people are not allowed to reproduce. There are too many people, and therefore not everyone can live in absolute extravagance. And Marx makes the point that this negates himself, because functionally what it does is shows the truth that his belief in extravagance is intimately tied to his belief that there are too many people, right? In this kind of like Kissingerian, well, Kissinger is a Malthusian. That's not fair to say. So there's a lot of discussion between the idea that you can sell parts of who you are, right? Or that you can store part of who you are. I don't know, Browning, what stood out to you most in the piece?
All right, so I would say the first one, we're going to lead off. Like the first passage, the first quote that I thought was a banger was, "Man becomes ever poorer as man. His need for money becomes ever greater if he wants to master the hostile power. The power of his money declines in inverse proportion to the increase in the volume of production. That is, his neediness grows as the power of money increases." So he's already hitting it hard. And then going a little further down, every product is a bait with which to seduce the other's very being. His money, every real and possible need, is a weakness which will lead the fly to the glue pot. General exploitation of communal human nature. Just as every imperfection in man is a bond with heaven, an avenue giving the priest access to his heart. Every need is an opportunity to approach one's neighbor under the guise of utmost amiability and to say to him, "Dear friend, I give you what you need, but you know the conditio sine qua non, you know the ink in which you have to sign yourself over me, and providing for your pleasure, I fleece you." So, like, that's the same as the priest is the drug dealer, right? If you want to make it simplistic, in my opinion. But it's also the same as, like, at this point, Apple products and that sort of thing. But even, I don't know if you all saw the Woody Harrelson. Well, Woody Harrelson just reposted it, but I think Adam McKay did it, where he mocked the BP and Chevron commercials. I saw several of them today watching football. You haven't seen them?
No, I haven't at all.
They're very idyllic, just kind of people chilling in nature, and then they the voiceover is like, "The world's going to need more energy. That's why we at Chevron have committed to producing 100 million more barrels of oil by 2024 and are drilling more in X and X basin." So Adam McKay made a commercial mocking those, which was pretty good, pretty decent as far as that sort of thing goes.
The part about money reminded me of colonial Kenya a lot, like the part you pointed out, and especially the line about the need for money is therefore the true need produced by the economic system and is the only need that it produces. Like how Britain came into Kenya and just forced they took all the land and forced like the native people to work on the British land to pay taxes. Like these concepts that the people really didn't even have a need for before everything was fine. People like had what they needed, living more in a communal way, especially like Kikuyu in the land in Kenya. But then when the British came and introduced this money system, this tax system, it just like disrupted the whole like fabric of like life, like, changing them into workers. You know what I'm saying? But like in a British sense of what work, because people were working already. You know what I'm saying? But like,
right. That's so. I'm not sure if it's from either right before or right after the section Browning read, but Marx mentions, and he mentions it also in Capital. To become a worker is to be reduced to the appendage of a machine. Right? You are a single part of a machine. You aren't the master of the machine. You aren't in control of it. It is simply a part of you, and you are a part of it. And in total, you produce goods, and that's all you do. There's nothing outside of that for you.
yeah.
So sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, like, yeah, you're only like important to the system that you can like produce more wealth for other people type shit.
Yeah. So this has come up a couple times now. So I brought it up to Hayes.
Go ahead, and then I'll bring up what I was going to say.
So I guess my question is, was pre-colonial Kenya capitalist? A, and like, was this primitive accumulation while it was happening?
Like before the British came, you mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure like how
How
the
I've
economic system was developed.
how I've read it, like describes, at least like for the Kikuyu, which one of the main ethnic groups that the British came in there and displaced and then forced to work on the same land they just took from. It was more like a family group type of system where like everybody might be Kikuyu, but your family group has like a certain amount of land that y'all work together, and maybe like a relative is like the head of that. And then when there's young men that like the thing that kept like the different age groups from fighting was that when the young men like wanted to go out and found their own homestead type area, there was enough available land where they could do that. But the British came in and took all that available land. So like now there's all this you know what I mean? Like it just changed the whole
Right.
way like the land worked, I guess.
Right. So that's interesting.
Because I know they
It,
didn't have the same concept of taxes or anything like that the British tried to impose for sure at that point, like the late 1800s, early 1900s.
right. Whereas like the Middle East has like fairly developed capitalism.
Yeah. Even I think Ethiopia was in feudalism when
Really?
yeah, Ethiopia apparently had like developed feudalism more so than a lot of other African societies by the point in time when Europeans came in.
Which also makes sense why it's such a like horribly destroyed country, because countries that can resist always suffer the most.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Every time I think of that, I think of Haiti, where like, you know, almost without fail, capitalists will go out of their way to attack it. Cartwright mentions it in his fucking writing on Drapetomania. Well, if you want to see the results of free blacks, just look to Haiti. Of course, they always ignore that the fact that they had to buy every person in Haiti's freedom from France after successfully fighting a revolution, but we can forget that, right?
And also that the U.S. failed to ignore them and made sure nobody, kind of like a Cuban embargo type of thing.
Yeah.
A similar situation where they didn't want it to be an example of black people being able to govern themselves. So they were like, we're going to strangle them out of it by making sure we don't recognize them, making sure people we trade with don't fuck with them, shit like that.
Yeah. I know that William Seward makes an argument long term for the recognition of Haiti very early. And so did Thaddeus Stevens, which, like, again, from both of them kind of makes sense.
Yeah,
they were they were the left wing of the Republican Party at the time.
Yeah, abolitionist type politicians.
Yeah, who like did not see slavery as an overwhelming positive.
Yeah.
I do know that in the book, oh God. It's a book on Reconstruction. I'll go check it when I go out to smoke next and let everyone know. But the author points out that the reason Europe was so like reticent to believe the U.S. opposed slavery was because every ambassador for the U.S. was either from the Deep South or a Northerner who opposed abolitionists. And none of them, every paper that got shipped internationally was pro-slavery, which de facto meant that everyone just assumed all of the U.S. supported slavery, and there was no way that that could not be true, right?
Yeah.
They used to call it the slave power, which is realistically the most accurate term I've seen for it, right? Like, it was this belief that in spite of having fewer citizens and fewer people, that they were still allowed to dominate politics and control politics.
Yeah, and I mean, even a lot of the northern businessmen, like Rhode Island, for instance, was one of the biggest slave trade beneficiaries of all the states just because they built all the ships up there. They had a lot of rum distilleries, which to make rum, you need sugar, which comes from, you know what I'm saying, slave produced sugar. So like,
yeah, it's incredible the amount that the North was reliant on Southern slavery Talking about slavery, Hayes. The North is incredibly reliant on Southern slave trade, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's via cotton and like, the mills shipping their raw product up to northern like garment factories
Yeah.
or
And English, because England needed that cotton too.
yeah, and England, of course, nominally opposed slavery in the most nominal possible way.
Yeah. They sent some ships to patrol West Africa, and then people just started going to. At one point, people, the slave traders just started going to. They would go around the bottom and go to Mozambique because, like, the British were like, "We're gonna make sure y'all don't get no more slaves from West Africa." But it was already after like 300 years of looting West Africa anyway. So they're like, "All right."
Interestingly, piracy was like only cracked down on because they were attacking slave ships.
Yeah, people don't know that a lot of pirates were slave traders. Like the dude that they celebrate in Florida with the Gasparilla Festival in Tampa Bay and all that shit.
Yeah.
He was just robbing slave ships and then just trading them to, like, in the illicit trade, because it was a whole illegal slave trade as well.
Oh, so I know that for a lot of pirates, especially during Golden Age piracy, because they were functional democracies, and it was like accepted that every person on the ship contributed equally, which is like it's a very liberal idea for the 1630s, right?
Yeah.
All of you do a job here. Fucking incredible, yeah. But at the time, the British Navy paid 8 pence for like a seaman. Whereas you got a full share on board the pirate ship. So like they would show up on naval ships and be like, all right, so here's the deal, guys. If you abuse your like crewmen, we're gonna dish out punishment 100 for every one that you dished out. Let's see how it goes. And all of a sudden, like naval officers stopped just like torturing the men on their ship because most of those dudes got fucking conscripted or chain ganged into it. They didn't give a fuck. Pirates would show up and they'd be like, "Do they beat you?" And they'd be like, "Yeah, absolutely. Fuck that guy." I don't even know why I was fighting for him, honestly.
When you said like that, everybody gets a vote was like a real liberal like idea for that time. It reminded me of like Lewis and Clark when they went across. I forgot what it was, but they let one of them, either Lewis or Clark, had a enslaved dude named York, black dude, and they let him vote on some shit or something, and it was supposed to be like a real. I remember in like elementary school learning about how they let York vote and how that was so great. And then like when they got home though, they didn't free York. He was still a slave for like the rest of his life and shit.
Oh, so like the difference is that Blackbeard's first mate was freed slave.
Oh, good.
He was like, so the Western slavers thought that he was the leader of his tribe because he was biggest. And it turns out that he was also like a brilliant military tactician and is largely responsible for at least a large portion of Blackbeard's success leading up to and including the capturing of the Queen Anne's Revenge, right?
So he was probably some kind of like military training.
Yeah, he was like a tribal leader.
Yeah.
But not because he was the biggest dude.
I'm gonna
which
have
is
to
all they could imagine. When Blackbeard gets hung, all of his men go back to being slaves, and a bunch of them kill themselves instead of that, who were black, because the argument was made that none of the blacks were smart enough to make their own decision about whether or not to follow Blackbeard.
So they
just assumed that he was holding them as slaves.
Yeah, so they didn't get killed for that though?
No, because they were too stupid to make their own decision. They were just following what their master told them to do.
Yeah, it sounds like some old school court cases.
They're like, no, that man has to be innocent. Why? Well, he's too dumb. Okay.
I'm looking up the Blackbeard. Would you say it was his first mate?
Yeah, he was. So because he was elected like a lot of dudes voted for him because he was a strong leader and like a good spokesman, and also spoke a bunch of languages, which I imagine becomes important very quickly on a pirate ship.
Yeah, probably.
When you're recruiting dudes from 8 different countries, it turns out it matters what fucking languages someone speaks. So this book, this essay by Marx, has one of my favorite quotes from Marx anywhere. 2 of them, actually. One of them will come up later, probably. The first is, self-denial, the denial of life and of all human needs, is its cardinal doctrine. The less you eat, drink, and read books, the less you go to the theater and dance hall, the public house, the less you think, love, theorize, sing, paint, fence, the more you save, the greater becomes your capital. The less you are, the more you have. The less you express your own life, the greater is your alienated life. The greater is the store of your estranged being. Everything which the political economist takes from you in life and in humanity, he replaces for you in money and in wealth. It's really Marx at his best, right? He's exceptionally clear here. He is very sure of what is happening in the world and how to describe it and explain it. And in large part, it's an explanation of how the treating of so there's a section in Luxembourg where she says that all needs had by the proletariat are treated as base, right? And that's eventually where we reach. Like at Marx's time, that wasn't true yet. Now it is. All needs are treated as base needs. Whether you need food or you need a house, everything is treated as too good for the working class. You deserve less. You can have less. Why don't you give this up? Fucking that Fox News shit that used to go around as a meme. You know what I'm talking about?
Which one?
The one that's like 80% of poor houses, 80% of quote unquote poor people have a TV or a refrigerator. Like, first of all, of course they have a TV. Everyone has a fucking TV.
Yeah. That's like some 1940s. Like, they got a TV down there? They're rich.
Yeah, literally by the 50s, 70% of American households have a television. By the 90s, that number is well over 90-some percent. But in the 50s, like, that's when we first start to get TVs in every house.
Mm-hmm.
And why is it? Because you don't watch TV with your neighbors at the bar. You watch TV in your house because now you lived in the suburbs. Now you're by yourself. Now you got to walk fucking 45 minutes to get into town rather than just walk outside and go down the street to the bar and go hang out with your boys and go fucking watch a football game, right? So, like, that's what the alienation from humanity is, right? It's this kind of abolition of the human society. Like, we keep reducing people down, and not just reducing people down into being less than human, but also reducing humanity down into being less than humanity, right? There is no community. You can't rely on anyone. Don't trust anyone. Fucking go watch CSI and be convinced that your neighbor is a violent rapist that you've never met.
You can still go lower, right? Because he goes on to say, man returns to a cave dwelling, which is now, however, contaminated with the pestilential breath of civilization, which he continues to occupy only precariously, it being for him an alien habitation for which he can be withdrawn for him any day, a place for which, if he does not pay, can be thrown out any day. For this mortuary he has to pay.
So it's worth pointing out the civilization line there, right?
Yeah.
We see it a lot from certain people, like fucking Derek Jensen, right? Jensen being the head of, eco-fascist group. What is it? Christ. Deep Green Resistance. So Deep Green, they believe that we should shut down all of human society all at once.
Which is a very Malthusian thing to say.
Yeah,
Pandas
for sure.
What is Pandas for Hitler? Is that a real group?
No, I don't know. I don't want to fucking look. I'm afraid that I'll find out it is.
Sounds like a furry outfit. I don't know about a great name. Sounds like a weird name.
It's have you ever seen the picture of the dude in a fursuit with the Confederate flag on him?
No,
It's that
but
dude.
oh, okay. Yeah.
And like,
Okay, it's not a real group.
yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it might jump off someday.
Look, I don't trust the internet anymore, really. On some level, like there's this acknowledgement that we have to, like, Marx is angry about society, but he is not angry about society writ large, right? He is not angry at everyone. He is angry that there is a specific class that is weaponizing and attacking people using society. You should not have a river of shit flowing through your house. In fact, that's a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, we reach the point where he says, in order to abolish the idea of private property, the idea of communism is completely sufficient. It takes actual action to abolish actual private property. History will come to it, and in this movement, which in theory we already know to be a self-transcending movement, it will constitute in actual fact a very severe and protracted process, but we must regard it as a real advance to have gained beforehand a consciousness of the limited character as well as the goal of this historical movement, and a consciousness which reaches out beyond it. So we find ourselves in a strange position where every time we end up in a position to take certain steps forward, we see an idea that comes from Hegel here, right? And that demonstrates dialectical thought, right? That before we attain a real advancement, we should consider it a victory if people gain consciousness of the need to gain it, right?
Yeah. Like you gotta get people aware of the need before you get it in actuality.
Yeah, you can't. So later on, he says that there's the word for equality is simply French for ich equals ich, I equal I. And he says that French is the language of what? Civil society or philosophy. And German is the language of something. Ooh, fuck me. I used to know that section much better, but
French is the political form. And then
yes, there we go. French is the political form. German is the economic form.
yeah.
And English is the legal form.
In England,
anyway.
real, material, practical, he said.
Oh yeah, the pragmatic form. So what we see is this development, certain things culturally being Slank is probably better to talk about with continental versus common
English.
law.
Yeah. I mean, most like America adopted a whole lot of English common law. It's like the basis for a lot of shit. And I mean, a lot of countries that aren't England also do it. And specifically, what pisses me off is a lot of former English colonies in Africa still wear the fucking wigs. Like all the lawyers and the judges and shit. Like it's 1776 with George Washington or some shit. So yeah.
Honestly, that's fucking insane.
If you look up like Nigerian lawyers, Ugandan lawyers, any of the former, they'll all have the wigs on. They look stupid as fuck.
If I'm imagining going to court and my lawyer wearing that wig.
I would feel like I was gonna lose.
I'd kill myself.
Yeah.
That'd be my only answer. Like, I would first of all have a panic attack when I saw that man. And then I'd be like, cool, this is it. Death penalty is not something I'm up for, but I'm about to get sure.
What you said you about to get?
Death penalty for sure. Like,
Oh,
I could be in for fucking misdemeanor, and they'd be like, yeah, no, he would get me convicted of a new crime.
Imagine a lawyer being late because he had to like powder his wig.
I would lose my fucking mind.
See, but we still do that weird shit. It's just like hidden behind the Supreme Court and stuff. Like those most arcane traditions we preserve, we just don't see.
Yeah. No, we still. Like I said, most
we
of
don't have anyone walking around like a dumbass in a fucking powdered wig, though.
Hey, that's one thing we.
No, we don't. But they still wear weird black robes and shit, and nobody can record it.
That's way more than I thought you were.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, I can.
You can't record the Supreme Court.
You work. The more you
court cases are recorded all the time, though.
Court cases, but not the Supreme Court. You're not allowed to record the Supreme Court.
Aren't Supreme Court cases televised sometimes?
Nope. Never.
I'm not even sure.
Never.
I got some boots. You inspired me to get some boots.
Only transcripts and court drawings.
Yeah, I let you piss that they had a couple.
Are you serious?
Those
So the court doesn't allow video, but it does allow audio tape. Which is honestly just as good. I don't need to fucking see any of them. I can live without seeing them, honestly. Like, name a single Supreme Court justice that you're like, damn, I really want to see them on the TV. Fucking never. They get on the TV to talk about something else. I'm like, you can fucking leave now.
This is true. There are no baddies on the Supreme Court.
I hate having to read their concurrences because, like, they say they agree, but then they want to talk a bunch of shit that's irrelevant.
There are a couple, I forget what case it was, but I cited one of the concurrences in my book on psych.
The cases we got to read for class, they ain't saying shit. It's just like Clarence Thomas talking about what he why he says agrees with Scalia, but for a different reason. Some dumb shit.
Yeah, no, this was a court case from like the 70s or 60s, back when we still had like a couple actual like almost left-wing Supreme Court justices. Like, no, like actual left-wingers, but like some of them were at least like kind of sympathetic.
Yeah.
And he took a concurrence, but the one dude was arguing that it should be backed for a non-constitutional reason, and the other man argued that it should be backed for he was arguing it should be backed for a constitutional right to freedom. The other man was arguing that it should be backed for a non-constitutional and economic right. And he argued that economic rights have to be subordinated to civil rights, which honestly could not imagine a fucking Supreme Court justice saying today.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be.
No, a lot of the cases we've had, they've had to argue civil rights stuff, but in economic terms, you know what I'm saying? Just to get it to sound acceptable to, like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
I don't know.
Right. The argument of why should we eliminate like certain, protected speech is one that it falls under a lot, where like companies will sue for the right to advertise shit that is obviously illegal. There used to be a bunch of cases where pharmaceutical companies would try to be able to not list side effects of their medicine in their paperwork to doctors.
Now they just say it real fast.
Yeah, no, they used to try to get out of giving it to doctors too, though.
Oh, it's worse.
They're like, if you're not going to read our research, then we shouldn't have to tell you it. They argued that it was the doctor's diligence based on having the right to prescribe medicine, because each right comes with a responsibility. Which, like, on the one hand, true. That your doctor should have read research on medicines that he prescribes.
Yeah.
On the other hand, like, pharmaceutical companies should not be able to just say that side effects don't exist.
Yeah, fuck that.
So Marx talks about desire here a lot.
And then the human
And in like a way that would have been very unappealing to Freud specifically. But that is the idea that our desires can become inaccessible to ourselves. That they can become the possession of another person. Which Marx didn't even see like a fully developed advertising industry yet.
Was he talking about with the rent too, in that sense? Like how you're like, I remember him talking something about like how the landlord can kick you out any time. It's not really like.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a little bit earlier, but yes, he is talking about the same thing, where all of our needs become subservient to another person and another person's ownership. But not only are the goods that we have subservient to them, but so is our physical, like our actual desires, our consciousness, our understanding of the world, the things that we want for ourselves. They're also denied to us. Because capitalism thrives on creating new needs, right? Before there was a car, nobody knew they needed a car. But now you need to know that you need a car.
Like
so it creates a whole new industry out of making people want things.
Yeah.
Hey.
Slank, have you seen The Gentleman? It's like a 2019 film with like Matthew McConaughey.
No, I don't think so.
Have you seen it, MD?
No.
So he plays this American kid from Kentucky, poor kid, whatever, who becomes a Rhodes Scholar but drops out because he is really good at selling weed. And he becomes the like best weed seller in Britain. But his whole strategy of selling weed is he goes to like these fifth, sixth generation like lords or whatever that like have their family's ancestral homes. So it's a Guy Ritchie movie, and according to the movie, it says that like, you know, as people die out in the families, the state takes some of the estate, like half the estate or whatever. So he pretty much builds underground grows and like gives them like 150 million a year. Because they don't know how to work. They don't know how to meet their needs. They don't know how to do any of that. But they're completely owned by the money. And it gets into the interpersonal dynamics of it too, which is interesting. But yeah, these are like I mean, it's because like they didn't even have to do what their ancestors did to build the fortune, right? They didn't have to conquer, do any of that. They just inherit the shit in like the modern era.
Right.
And so when this guy comes along, he's like, "I'll give you $100 million a year. Just let me have this little operation on your estate." Then they're like, "Yeah, we'll do it." And the movie also touches on how he has to do it on the estates because in England they have the you can like just walk around and shit. Like it's way more free to roam than it is in America. Or like it's way easier to be arrested for trespassing in America, shit like that. In England, you can just be walking around and roaming.
How do you mean?
Like there's right to roam laws. I'm not saying it's like some utopia. I'm saying there's just like different remnants left over from feudal times.
I don't.
And so you can't. They're like the only like places you can't necessarily roam on are like these estates, according to the movie.
Yeah, that's definitely not true in real life.
Yeah. So well, yeah.
Like the difference is like in real life, the way that it was enforced was that if you were a vagrant, the first time you would either have your thumb cut off or your hand burned, or branded. Rather, calling it burned is like, oh, they're going to stick your hand to a fire and it's going to hurt, but like you were given a brand, or you had your thumb cut off, or the second time they would execute you. So it was one of the benefits of the right of the clergy was that if you were capable of reading and writing, you could not be executed for vagrancy.
Find a job where I can work from home. Somewhere where I can get a little house.
So, MD, did you see that one video I sent earlier about the?
Yes, I can actually pull that up in just a second. Give me 1 second, guys.
The first 2 minutes or so reminded me kind of like similar things of what Mark was talking about, like alienation.
Yeah.
I joined Uber One because I hate delivery fees and I need to save money for when I get canceled. And I don't want to go back to.
Sorry, I meant to have it pulled up already and
how would I even
completely forgot to.
I got a big natural toast on that.
But while you're pulling it up, I'll read one of my favorite quotes from this one. When communist artisans associate with one another, theory, propaganda, etc., is their first end. But at the same time, as a result of this association, they acquire a new need, the need for society. And what appears as a means becomes an end. In this practical process, the most splendid results are to be observed whenever French socialist workers are seen together. Such things as smoking, drinking, eating, etc. are no longer means of contact or means that bring them together. Company, association, and conversation, which again is society on its end, are enough for them. The brotherhood of man is no mere phrase with them, but a fact of life, and the nobility of man shines upon us from their work-hardened bodies.
All right. Yeah, no, I like that quote. I did just get this pulled up, so I'm going to play that for everyone quick.
Of money for working, wages and so forth, and then they steal all that shit back from you in terms of the way he got his other things set up. His whole credit gimmick society, man, consumer credit, buy shit on credit. He gives you a little bit of shit to cool your ass out, and then steal all that shit back with shit called interest, the price of money. Motherfuckers are non-producing, non-existent, industries, motherfuckers who deal with paper. There's a cat who will stand up and say to you, he's in mining. And he sits in an office, man, on the 199th floor in some motherfucking building on Wall Street, and he's in mining. And he has paper, certificates, which are embroidered and shit, stocks, bonds, debentures, obligations, he's in mining. And he's sitting up in Wall Street and his fingernails ain't been dirty in his motherfucking life. He went to Phillips Andover or Exeter, he went to Harvard, he went to Yale, he went to the Wharton School of Business, and he's in mining. And the motherfuckers who deal with intangibles are the motherfuckers who are rewarded in this society. The more abstract and intangible your shit is, stocks, what is stocks? A stock certificate is evidence of ownership in something that's real. Ownership. He owns and controls and therefore receives, the benefit from. That's what they call profit. He fucking with shit in Bolivia. He fucking with shit in Chile. He's Kennecott. He's Anaconda. He's United Fruit. He's in mining. He's in what? He ain't never in his life produced shit. Investment bankers, stockbrokers, insurance men. It's motherfuckers who don't do nothing. We see that this whole society, man, exists and rests upon workers, and that this whole motherfucking society controlled by this ruling clique is parasitic, vulturistic, cannibalistic, and is sucking and destroying, man, the life of motherfucking workers, and we have to stop it because it's evil.
There's a lot of confusion amongst white people in this country, amongst white workers in this country about who the enemy is. The same contradictions of overproduction, the same contradictions of increasing production are prevalent within the white working class. But because of the immense resources of propaganda, publicity, radio, television, journals, magazines, and so on and so forth, which can be drawn upon, white people tend to get a little bit confused about who the enemy is. If you take a look at, white workers in Flint, for instance, in the automobile industry, who are pretty hard pressed because the Buick plant up there is whipping their ass. And it's whipping their ass about twice as hard today as it was 5 years ago. But who do they think the enemy is? The nigga on the street. Crime in the streets, was a problem. Or black people, moving into our neighborhood, causing housing prices to decline and threatening to rape our wives and daughters, And as a result, you get a cat like George Wallace who comes along. And George Wallace is not the first of the populist fascists in this country. And George Wallace talks about how the big fat cats of Wall Street are messing up the country. It's the little man that's suffering because of, the big, rich financial barons of Wall Street in conjunction and in alliance with the niggas. And the white folk, the white workers tend to buy that shit up. They tend to eat it up. They tend to love it. That's not in Birmingham, Alabama that I'm talking about. That's in Flint, Michigan. As a result of that thing, millions and millions of white workers in this country just don't understand what's going down and end up becoming counter-revolutionary, even though the contradictions which they face every day would say that they should be the most staunch revolutionaries. Black people represent the most forward and progressive movement inside the plant, which are calling not for, in reality, they ain't calling for the destruction, of, the white working class. The demands which are being presented, are demands which are calling for an uplifting of the working class as a whole. And the actual fact of the matter is that the movement of black workers is a class movement that's calling for a total change in the relationship between workers and owners altogether. And what it's saying is that certainly we don't want all the shitty and lowest paying jobs in the plant. Certainly we don't want to be, most exploited people in the plant. And we aren't calling for anybody to be exploited. We're calling for the elimination of exploitation in the plants. We're calling for the elimination of racism in the plants. We're calling for the elimination of any kind of conditions inside of the plant, which are bad, for the basic, health and enjoyment, of life. We are not calling for the replacement of the black proletariat, with white workers, who happen to be in a higher stage in the ladder. We are not calling for a situation in which white oppressors will be replaced by black oppressors. We are calling for the ending of oppression altogether. Basically the reason that they're racist is because of the fact that they're afraid, that the little bit of niche that they got in society is going to be lost. But ain't nobody been trying to demonstrate to them that rather than being against the black movement and being enemies of the black movement, that they should be in favor of the black movement and supporters of the black movement, because the things that the black movement is doing inside of industry are basically in their interests. The kinds of demands and the kinds of movements, which black people are making inside of the plants are not inimical to the interests of the average white worker.
That was a really good video. It was very well argued and very strongly argued. Also, when he talked about the split in society, it reminded me a lot of Dead Prez in the very beginning of Police State. The state becomes necessary at that juncture in human society, only at that juncture in human society where there's division between those who have and those who ain't got.
I thought
I'm currently writing a message to Schoener.
It reminded me of the Marx piece too, in that he was talking about how the people who don't really do anything but like sit in the office, you know what I'm saying, touching stock papers and shit, they're the ones that are like getting all this wealth, whereas the workers are the ones producing it.
Right, yeah. Not that this is a perfect thing to compare it to, but he certainly mirrors Adorno on it to a certain extent. Adorno mentions the necessity of that Ulysses is the first true bourgeois man, because Ulysses simultaneously knows how to fix and build a ship better than anyone else because he has the training and the experience to do it. And he ends up in a position where the only thing he can do is order other people to to fix the ship that is broken, that they all need to get home on, because he is in charge, and he is completely estranged from his own ability to do work, and they are completely estranged from their own ability to make decisions.
Yeah.
And the result is that no one can make decisions and no one can do their work properly. And it's because of this. So Marx talks about it in here: division of labor. Once again, Marx loves hammering division of labor all the time, every chance he fucking gets. I'm currently writing up a message for the chat that I'm going to leave on screen, which is a request from everyone to donate money to a man named Marlon Gibson. Marlon is a longtime comrade who is currently being held in Texas County Jail. He was at one point associated with Fred Hampton Jr.'s organization. And due to a nonviolent felony, in spite of his obvious need to protect himself as someone who is associated with the son of a Panther, and in spite of his nonviolent offense, is being held over a gun charge in the state of Texas. New York recently ruled that there were certain restrictions that no longer apply. The New York Supreme Court upheld that. And it would be really great if everyone could help put money on his books to keep him going. He is currently representing himself per se. And that is a result of public defenders largely being overworked and unwilling to assist him. I don't have the money to find him representation, and neither does anyone else that I know, really. So if you can donate at least some to him, it would be really great. We would really appreciate that. I just thought of it because Dead Prez came up.
Dude.
Behind enemy lines is always there. Once I find his email, I will be putting that up. Or the email that you can donate to him at. Also, I'm more than willing to show everyone receipts of their money making it to him. You can DM me on Twitter or send me an email at mdpetroselli@gmail.com. So, yeah, there is this like strong sense within this piece or within that video, that the people who are producing labor are not seeing the results of the wealth, and also that the people who are producing the wealth are unable to do the labor themselves, right? Like, it takes time to be a middle manager. And in an ideal world, like, middle management would be fine, because that would be like a certain amount of it would be responsibility shared amongst everyone, and a certain amount of it would be elected, right? Like, there's no reason that factory workers cannot elect their own manager.
Yeah.
realistically, you know the people who you work with who seem like they would be a good leader, and you know the people who you work with who seem like they're going to fuck you up.
Pretty much, yeah.
I don't know. I worked in kitchens for years. I bartended for years. Like, you know when someone just cannot do their fucking job.
Yeah.
And if you can't do your job, I'm sure as fuck not trusting you to tell other people what to do. So as this comes to pass, Marx says he notices the realizations of the essential powers of man only as the realization of his own excesses. So every time Marx talks about the essential powers of man, it's important to remember what he considers the essence of man. So his argument is because he is trying to come up with an essence that is universal to the extent that it can be applied to every person who has ever lived, right? Which is complicated. Like, it takes more than simply being something that people do to be the essence of what defines people. So the essence that he defines is that humans are capable of changing the world around them to suit human needs. So people are capable of doing work. So when he talks about human essence belonging to another, it's the thing that makes everyone in history united is that they have changed the world around them at some point. Other than that, like, the ability to, like, what else would define humanity, right? Because it has to be something that is absolutely universal. So it wouldn't be like, well, I mean, there's the obvious things that define like living things, but what makes humanity different from everything else around it? They changed nature to suit their needs. So like when human essence, the essential powers of man, the ability to change nature for his needs, for his desires, becomes owned by someone else. Like when Marx talks about species essence, that is what species essence is. It's not this like ephemeral thing that's fucking imaginary, right? And we see it like what defines revolutionary, right? It's
Best season.
So like, and we see that same kind of abstractification from like human essence being something very real and specific in the same way that we see like works like Fanon get neutered of revolutionary potential, right? I will never forget the first exposure I had to Fanon was someone arguing that both Gramsci and Fanon were pacifists. And that when Fanon said that the only way to reclaim your humanity was to rise up with a knife in your hand, and that your shaking hand had more humanity given back to it than the entire body of a colonizer, that he was being metaphorical.
Of course. Fanon said like the only way the colonists can like reclaim their like sense of self is out of the rotting cadaver of or the only way the colonized can reclaim like their, you know what I'm saying, their place is out of the rotting cadaver of the colonists. So I don't know if that was
a metaphor, baby.
But I think he was, you know, like being literal with that.
Nah, he meant it as like, you know, sometimes like you feel more human when you beat up like an effigy of something.
Yeah, of course.
Like if you make a piñata out of a French soldier
yeah.
and beat it with a stick, you'll feel better.
My other favorite is when Republicans take the Malcolm X quote about liberals.
And they don't quote the other half where he's like calls one the fox and one the wolf or whatever.
Yes, and I mean he's correct, Alex. Like that is the essential nature of revolution, is that it is a violent uprising of one class against another.
Yeah.
Or I mean, I guess it can be one class against another faction of the same class, but that feels more like the American Revolution feels more like a coup d'etat than it does a true revolution, right? Especially because like even people like Thomas Paine just leave afterwards because they won't ban slavery.
That the whole concept that you're talking about with Marx too, it reminds me of the Gaddafi quote where he says that like man's freedom is lacking when somebody else controls his I got to get the exact one. Man's freedom is lacking if somebody else controls what he needs, for need may result in man's enslavement of man. So like, but Gaddafi goes to a different conclusion with it because like, I don't think he banned private property. He made everybody own a house, if that makes, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, and Marx
that's like
talks about that a little bit in relation to Blanqui and Proudhon, who like see the increase of wages as the equivalent of socialism. Which like it, he usually calls it reactionary socialism. I'm walking a real fine line here.
I mean, I think in Libya, like it seemed decent because like he was trying to make sure that everybody didn't have to pay rent, but he like made landlords illegal and then made everybody like control their own, you know, house type.
So it certainly makes capitalism more tolerable.
Yeah.
The issue is that there is still this division between owner and laborer, right? So like what it does is it takes away the meanness in Marx's terms of capital, mean in this sense meaning like lowest or base rather than like cruelty.
Yeah.
Which is still a positive for the working class. Like there is no need to like lie about that. But the flip side of that is historically, there are certain groups that when they come to power during a revolution that is supported by communists, they make a point to hit the left first. Because usually the left is overwhelmingly popular in the country, and whoever gets put in charge immediately after a revolution is kind of a compromise candidate, right?
Yeah.
And like this is not to attack, but we've seen it with Iran, and we saw it in Libya to a lesser extent.
I mean,
but like it's still
happened in Egypt probably too. Like most like
under Nasser.
Yeah, like most like I guess we call it like left nationalist countries or something. Indonesia, when I think in Indonesia the Communist Party was very close with what was the guy's name? That the CIA.
Oh fuck.
You know what I'm talking about. Before they put the like military dictator.
Suharto.
Yeah. I think they work closely with the Communist Party in Indonesia, like whatever his party officially was.
I know that they were at some point allied for like revolutionary purposes.
All right.
I'm not sure how close they ever were.
Yeah.
But now I'm wondering if Gaddafi read Stalin significantly.
He probably did. I know he was like against like Soviet style communism and whatever, but I don't know.
The only left nationalist I can think of who doesn't do that really at all is Patrice Lumumba.
Yeah, I mean, he really didn't have time to get into it. Honestly, they took him out within like 6 months or something.
And I mean, I guess Chavez, but that's because the U.S. forces him left. Like when he takes power, he's like a right-wing bourgeois liberal nationalist who just wants like the U.S. out and Venezuela to dominate their own politics.
Yeah.
And when the U.S. tries to carry out their coup, the only people who rose up to defend him were the working class. So fucking stay where your bread's buttered, baby. Don't leave.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Brennan.
I was just gonna say to bring us like towards the end of the piece to kind of wrap up. It's kind of a weird metaphor, but like when I've been hiking and stuff, and like you notice these little caves and stuff, there's like an innate sense like, huh, it'd be nice to just live in a little cave and not deal with having to pay bills and all this shit. And Marx kind of hits at it towards the end when he says, we have said above that man is regressing to the cave dwelling, etc. But he is regressing to it in an strange, malignant form. The savage in his cave, a natural element which freely offers itself for his use and protection, feels himself no more a stranger, rather feels as much at home as a fish in water. But the cellar dwelling of the poor man is a hostile element, a dwelling which remains an alien power, only gives itself up to him insofar as he gives up to it his own blood and sweat, a dwelling which he cannot regard as his own hearth, where he might at last exclaim, "Here I am at home," but where instead he finds himself in someone else's house, in the house of a stranger who always watches him and throws him out if he does not pay his rent. He is also aware of the contrast and quality between his dwelling and a human dwelling that stands in the other world, in the heaven of wealth. So that's like that's a banger, I think, of a quote.
It's also the section you were talking about, Slank.
Yeah.
The section on rent.
Yeah, that was a part.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, so there's like a misrepresentation, and this is not to say that landlords are good, but there is a misrepresentation by a certain element of the left that is, in a lot of ways, kind of childish about things. That sees all landlords as like the equivalent of the landlords that Mao went after, right?
Yeah.
And this is not a defense of landlords, but like your landlord has far more legal restrictions than like the landlords that Mao was attacking. Like they are not the same
Like
kind of person.
Chinese feudal lords, basically.
Yeah, you would like BlackRock would be closer to the kind of people that he was going after. And even then, like BlackRock is not going to like legally seize you as a serf. Like they're not going to force you into labor. So the reason I was wondering if he read Stalin is because there's an old Stalin quote. It's difficult for me to imagine what personal liberty is enjoyed by an unemployed, hungry person. True freedom can exist only where there is no exploitation and oppression of one person by another, where there is not unemployment, and where a person is not living in fear of losing his job, his home, and his bread. Only in such society can personal and any other freedom exist for real and not on paper.
Yeah, it sounds similar to the Green Book quote.
Yeah. Which doesn't mean necessarily that they are identical or the same. But like, you know, I would not be surprised if he had read Stalin.
Yeah.
Especially after like my podcast with Hayes, I found out that one of the fucking Mujahideen leaders was reading Vowen Jap, Mao, and Che.
All right.
It's literally how they held out against the
Oh,
Soviets.
probably
for so long.
all three of them wrote on guerrilla warfare and things. So
yep.
Yeah.
Everyone else goes to Pakistan to get support, and at the time, he can only get support from Western Europe. Really, for the whole war, the U.S. sends 2,500 Stinger missiles to Afghanistan. 8 of them went to Massoud. So, like, does he get U.S. support? Yeah. I'm sure he's not your first choice, though.
Yeah.
But, like, there's this moment where he allies with the Soviet Union against one of the other Mujahideen leaders because he argues that he's a cancer growing inside of Islam.
Mhm.
And that before you can fight an enemy, you have to purge the cancer from your own body. And the U.S. really hates that. Like, that's really when they decide, like, we're not giving you a fucking thing.
Yeah.
But Masood reads all of these people, and he goes to Afghanistan with 17 rifles and 30 dudes and $150 in his pocket. And he ends up with the second largest army of 20,000 men, fully outfitted with Russian armor, Russian tanks. They have Russian military gear. They have Russian vehicles. They have Russian guns. And it's because he used the exact same tactics, like the exact same Marxist guerrilla warfare tactics that Marxists used to beat the U.S. And I mean, by the 80s, you have the revisionist government, and they're fighting like a capitalist country.
Mm.
You know, Brezhnev is not a sincere communist, and was not using Marxist theory to fight. Like, there's a reason that Marxism is called a science. It's not because it's like fucking magic. Like, in that, science has been reduced to magic. And when people say Marxism-Leninism is a science, it is in like a fundamentally anti-Marxist stance where like everything that is historically true is always true, which is fundamentally opposed to science, first of all. And second of all, what sort of like fucking nut job are you that you sit around and just like worship science all day? You sound insane. Anybody you tell that to, they'll just be like, you should not speak publicly. Like, I would tell you to stop speaking publicly about Marxism if you said something insane like that.
Yeah.
Fucking let somebody who doesn't sound like a moron when they talk do that. Be clear that like Marxism is a science because it develops a form of knowledge, right? But be able to define science. All of the like Marxism-Leninism is the immortal dialectical science of Marxism-Leninism materialism, or the immortal science of dialectical materialism and Marxism-Leninism. Fucking define the word science for me. What does science mean to you? Because
what is the dictionary definition of science? Like the study of, I don't know.
So the definition I've been using, like in my writing of science, is David Cooper's definition of science, which is also R.D. Lang's. They use like the same definition because they write a book together when they're both pretty young. But it is a form of knowledge suitable to the study of a specific area of human experience.
Okay.
This says the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the world and through observation and experimentation. So similar in ideas, except like bourgeois.
Which is why it's like anti-science for that viral video that went around like this past week.
God.
And they found out that lady literally works for the brand that makes like Cheetos or Takis or whatever.
I understand.
But that video, where they're like, any food is healthy. By the definition MD just gave, well, that's anti-science because we know that's not true. You can literally feel it. I feel it because I eat like shit.
Well, so it's worth noting that like science as we practice it is not science as it really is, right? Like we atomize and isolate separate fields of science. You learn chemistry separate from physics, separate from biology. Does the way your blood move not get affected by physics? Does the way your body move not get affected by physics? Does the shape of atoms not get affected by physics? Does your body not get affected by chemistry? Like when you separate these things out, they don't make any sense because it's just like it would be like if people were throwing pictures, screenshots of a movie at you and treating that as if it was you watching the movie, right?
Yeah.
Like, I throw 12 scenes down on a table and I say, tell me what movie that is, what happened in it, and you've never seen the movie before. You have no fucking clue. What's up, Suda? You have no fucking clue what's going on in that movie. And science functions very much the same way. That, like, the idea of science as it is to isolate things down to the smallest fact you can. And it's the same way we teach history, right? You memorize dates. On this day, this happened. On that day, that happened.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. You don't actually understand history. Why are those things related?
Yeah. Just remember dates.
History is not a series of events, it's a process. And, like, to be...
I'm here too, Suda, you fucking asshole.
What else?
The only argument I can imagine for... So I will argue that Okay, so when we make science into this like monolithic thing, right? And Marxists are notorious for doing it, and largely it's why a lot of them ended up supporting some pretty questionable ideas over the past 2 years. And somehow forgetting that Anthony Fauci is a fucking monster. Who could forget that the sole causes of HIV are homosexuals, hemophiliacs, Haitians, and heroin users? That was a real thing that Dr. Anthony Fauci said. But, like, because it was treated as, like, immunology is somehow separate from basic biology and from your psychology and from chemistry and from all of these things, right? It became, well, the only way to possibly respond to illness is to, like, create a new breakthrough thing. The reality is that, like, in a society where our food is not denutriated, in a society where our lifestyles are not fucking decimated by the environment we live in, where we're not decimated by the fucking water we drink and the food we eat and the lack of activity in our lives and not having a social sphere and never going out in the sun. Like, in that world, this is not a concern. Right? We all live healthier lifestyles. We are healthier people. But when you reduce the concept of a need to nothing to it is the most basic form of this thing, right? Then all of a sudden you can say, well, you know, you don't fucking need fruits and vegetables, and you don't need to have, you know, a healthy diet, because in place of that, here's a Hot Pocket. It fits in your time schedule, and if you spend more than 2 minutes cooking your food, then you're actually wasting time that you could have done being productive for something else. And isn't it more important that you be productive? Fucking England at this point is terrible. Marx has a whole essay about it, how they were giving opium to children because the mothers would have to go to work. And, you know, Marx isn't opposed to women going to work. What he is opposed to is not having a way to take care of children at home, and a society that is now changing so that women have to go to work because you cannot afford to live on one salary anymore. And all of a sudden, all of the children that were had before that was true still have to be cared for. So instead of taking care of kids, doctors would give mothers opium to give to their children to put them to sleep for 8 hours. And when it came to the poor, they would routinely prescribe the wrong amount of fucking opium And Marx makes the comment that the opium epidemic in England is the revenge of the Chinese for the British bringing opium there.
The first war for drugs.
Yeah.
Or just like today, they just don't let kids be kids and learn how to, mature. They just slap them on Adderall or whatever drugs from a young age.
I mean, yeah, we have waged a war on the concept of human experience and the idea that human emotions are in any way important to humanity.
Stay down. He was helped off the field, evaluated by the team doctor for neck and upper body. They watched the replay on the monitor. He is going back in the game right now. Remember, this is his first game back.
The rest of the piece, after the last quote I read, he goes at every other economist from the time, his contemporaries pretty much. There's a couple other bangers in there. But we can there's definitely some more economic stuff in here we didn't really touch on, but that we didn't really plan on that.
So I mean, yes and no. Division of labor is both philosophical and an economic concept. And Marx really attacks a certain idea that is very prevalent in the U.S., which is that some people are just born with different skills. He specifically mentions that the division of labor is the difference in these skills is more of a result of the difference in labor than it is the difference of labor a result of the difference in skills. Realistically, you can teach most people to do most things, at least pretty well. I'm never going to be 6'11". I'll never be Shaq, but
yeah, I mean the exceptions are but those have always been the exceptions throughout history. Since the
number of people who will ever be born like LeBron James at fucking 6'8" with a 4.4 40 and able to jump a fucking 30-inch vertical, almost zero. But again, we're talking about such marginal outliers that they should be excluded from an average.
Yeah.
Whereas if you spend 8 months learning how to woodwork, you can probably be good enough to build something. If you spend 8 months doing realistically most fucking things, by the end of it, you'll be fine. You'll figure it out.
Somebody that Steve Spagnuolo just loves that he helped find.
He
just has been producing all night long.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I'm good.
I was just gonna say, sounded like Malcolm Gladwell over there, 10,000 hours.
I'm Malcolm Gladwell believes that you can do it by yourself by magic.
Yeah, no, he's something special. But
Malcolm Gladwell's a fucking moron.
Yes, his 10,000 hours idea is not completely wrong.
He defended Sandusky or something, I think.
Oh yeah, he's defended worse than that. I'm pretty sure, but yeah, but his whole idea behind 10,000 hours is not necessarily wrong, but it was more so when I've read that book and his examples are Bill Gates and shit, and Bill Gates got his 10,000 hours in because his mom was best friends with some computer dude. And Bill Gates didn't have to work as a kid. You know what I mean? It was just, he was a rich kid who got to go spend time in this computer lab because his mom was a wealthy entrepreneur already established. But he holds him up as a paradigm of someone who worked hard. It's very funny.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely value in telling people that they can learn to do things in enough time. But I got almost every part of that fucking wrong. have like 12 seconds of memory and could not remember while I was typing. The advantages that Marlon Gibson, oh, Jesus Christ. Ooh, falling apart over here. The advantages that Malcolm Gladwell offers by reading him are almost invariably overwhelmed by the fact that he is a questionable historian, even at his best of times. B, not a good social scientist at all. And like C, that he's ultimately like, what does Marx call the guy? A spineless fish man?
Yeah, you're playing
The same thing applies to Gladwell. Like he changes and is mutable for whoever is convenient at that point.
one drive, and that's that.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to step outside and smoke quick because clearly I need to collect after that fuck up.
I have to hop off, put the little one to bed.
All right. So we'll probably call it here for the night.
Yeah. We'll be back with more theory next week.
Yep. We'll be back next week. All right. We'll see you at 9 o'clock next week, everybody. Have a nice night.
Peace.